Hello, greetings to the Mercer Island School Board. Thank you for this opportunity to share a video about Mahlum's bond planning work for prioritized upgrades at the high school main campus and Crest Learning Center ahead of next week's board meeting. My name is Becky Hutchinson and I'm joined here by my colleague Claudia Saunders. As you've seen throughout our process, we're using the video format as a means of sharing the details of our bond planning process and their outcomes. This allows us to collectively use our time in person for questions and dialogue. Through this presentation, we will understand the process for needs gathering and goal setting. We'll understand the project prioritization process, its inputs, and our evaluation criteria. We're going to understand the scope and impact of the recommended programmatic updates. And we're going to understand the community input on the proposed bond projects. So, said simply, we want you to have transparency to our process. We want to collectively pause and reflect on what we've learned. And we want to confirm the recommended program updates at Mercer Island High School main campus and Crest for the next bond. Now, this work is sitting within the larger context of bond considerations before you, which include to finish the middle school and to complete must-do projects across the district. Now, we find ourselves today at the end of the process that we charted last spring. To get to this point, which again is the recommendation of program updates at Mercer Island High School's main campus and Crest, to get here, we organized our work into 3 phases. We've had the gathering phase, then the testing phase, and finally the prioritization phase. We're going to summarize this overall process, and then we're going to dive more deeply into the details and outcomes of the prioritizing phase. Claudia, please take us away.
Yeah, so you can see there on the slide that there was a series of groups that we spoke to a couple of times, and then they fell underneath this long bar. So we're going to break down who these groups were. If we go to that next page, you can see that there are these 3 groups, and what we were looking to do was have them help us understand the various perspectives as they relate to the needs for the school environment. So the first one, this school community, is really helping us understand that broad perspective and set a foundation for the more detailed conversations that we had with the other 2 groups. And the kinds of activities that we did with this school community included broad surveys. It included talking to the student senate. We met with the parents at the advisory council. We left boards where the students could leave us their insights and their perspectives for a series of days, so they could leave their ideas and amplify their voice even if we weren't there in the room with them. We did observations. We walked with staff. We walked with the principal. We walked with facilities. And we also did a workshop where we considered what the future of education could look like. The school design guidance and evaluation team, or what we have referred to as the GET, and we'll probably call them that throughout this presentation, is really different groups within the school community that are pulling from some of those other broader school community groups. The primary task during this gathering phase of the GET was to generate and agree upon community values that were inclusive and reflect the Mercer Island High School and Crest community. And you can see the perspectives in that group included students, teachers, administrators, and parents. So similar makeup to some of the activities that we did with the broader school. And then lastly is the leadership team. And they made sure that we were grounding our discoveries and our conversations in the operations of running a school. And within that, we also had diverse perspectives here. You'll see that we come back to these groups later in the process. So if we go to the next slide, this is a quick snapshot of what that broader school community outreach journey looked like. We had those surveys that went over a span of time. We had these moments to speak to these different focus groups. We had opportunities to go in and observe different classes and different groups as they were using and operating the building, and just being around to converse with the school community. And through this, we gained some great insights. This next slide is going to tell us some of the things that we learned from the students. And they really gave us some big ideas around what's working in their school, how they see it. And these are really the options for them to be able to explore all the various things that they're interested in. And they told us what's not working, that some of these spaces are really dark, that they're really uncomfortable, that it can be difficult or unwelcoming to engage with their teachers outside of the allotted class time. And what their hopes were, that they really wanted better connections to each other and to the natural world. When we talked to the parents, they helped us understand why they chose this district and what it would require to keep it attractive to newcomers to the community and those already within it. And they echoed some of the hopes that the students shared with us. In essence, what they want is to support the great programs that are already operating within the school with equally great spaces. When we walked and did our observations, we were able to do this a couple of different times. One of the times we walked through is when the building was occupied. The students were there, the teachers were there, and we were able to talk to the teachers and see and hear firsthand what the pressures are in the day to day in all the various types of spaces. And when the school was unoccupied, we had the opportunity to kind of look behind the skin and understand how the building is holding up and where it's wearing down. So from this, all of it helped us set a great foundation to connect with our two working groups. That's the GET and the leadership team. We had a clear idea of some of the recurring goals. We heard similar ideas and similar themes. We had a picture of what makes this Mercer Island and Crest community so unique. And we understood what the teachers observed as hindering their ability to serve to the best of their ability. And all of this coalesced into one large list of what could be potential projects and opportunities that we saw in order to address some of those needs. And this is where our working teams helped us create a vision and guiding principles for this project. A vision so we didn't lose sight of what we really wanted to do, which was create a student-centric, flexible school community that fosters belonging, drives innovation, and removes the barriers to their learning. And the guiding principles are really the four markers along the way that we would come back to when we found ourselves exploring or advocating for different perspectives. And these became our why. Why would we take on this work? Because we want to encourage the personalized passions and interests of the students. We want to embrace innovation and the dynamic evolution of the world in which they are stepping into. We want to create community and foster belonging through relationships, and we want to prioritize the holistic health and the sustainable comfort of this community. So all of that led us to the work at the end of our gathering phase where we felt we had a really good sense, a really good understanding of what the wants and the needs are and what were the values that we would come back to start to have these difficult conversations. And then over the summer, we did a lot of work. We scoped out a variety of different ways that we could address these needs and worked with our engineers and we worked with our cost estimators to get a good sense of what the constructability would be and what the cost would be, and all the different ways that we might be able to combine, remove, or connect these projects to address the most viable options in this prioritizing phase. So through all of that scoping work in the summer, we were able to recognize in these pink bubbles here, identify all the areas where work was identified for a potential. There could be a project there. You can see that it covers quite a bit of both campuses, and we put a dollar to that through costing and comparing and combining these projects together and understanding what is viable now, what could be deferred, what could be CapTech funding. And these are the projects that we thought would fall under the scope of work that must be done and the projects that we would like to prioritize then with our working groups that were viable from a cost and constructability perspective. And this is quite a long list. And through all of that, this was where we left the board last time. We were just about to step into our evaluation phase. And this is where we were going to come back to our working groups to refine the options, making sure that we could have consensus and provide a clear recommendation to the board.
So here we are now, launching you into the prioritizing phase and showing you what our process looked like and then getting to our outcomes. So as evidenced by what Claudia just shared to you, the school needs at the end of the gathering and testing phase were quite long and quite high. And really the goal of this phase was to bring them into alignment with the community support. In order to do that work, we went back to these same groups, but their purpose changed in this phase. The leadership team, their charge was really to establish baseline requirements for ongoing successful building operations and to select and prioritize the projects for the bond proposal. With the GET, their purpose was really helping us use those guiding principles to interpret and prioritize the proposed projects. And finally, the school community. We went back to them to evaluate what it is that we had tested and to gauge the level of community support that can be found around the recommendations. All of that work was done in the context of understanding and right-sizing this package to the realities of construction and aligning it to a scope of work that can be completed in 2 summers and a school year in between. And with the understanding that to figure out what this work looks like and how to do it sensitively on an occupied campus, that we need to be able to work with someone who will prioritize the learning environments so that that is not disrupted while the improvements are ongoing. And as we tested various scenarios, as Claudia mentioned, we kept coming back to those guiding principles. It was imperative that we were able to check ourselves on what the right balance of projects were by measuring the perceived impact that they would have, not just as a standalone project, but really in concert with the others. And when working with some groups, we were finding affinity towards some principles and away from others that were then countered by working with other groups who maybe were skewing to some other priorities. But really what this whole phase and process did was to test those out in order to bring us back into balance so that the concert, the suite of projects selected, could really equally impact all of those principles set forth by the GET. Now, the outcome of this process and into the recommendation really lands in leveraging what you have. Again, these are strategic renovations that will maintain the continued legacy of excellence and align the quality of spaces with the caliber of your programs. And we'll do it all without adding square footage to your building. And with that, we are investing responsibly with the selection of projects. And we are targeting those so that we can competitively equip your students for health and success. And knowing that with that needing to balance the needs with and the selected projects with the community support, we can't do it all. But how can that selection of projects be such that wherever we are impacting can be felt by the greater community? That is the greater community of students and staff at the school, and also outside the walls to the parents and community members who come into the space to celebrate the student work. So at the end of this phase, we have selected the prioritized projects that are now in alignment with community support. So Claudia now is going to take us into the recommendation, and we'll start to walk through and show you what each of these projects looks like.
Great. And so as a reminder, when we left last time, there was, if we go to the next slide, I believe, quite a bit of need that had covered a lot of the potential 2 buildings. Through this balancing work, we were able to reduce the amount of area of critical impact as far as construction to about half of the school, and we'll see that on the next slide. But the areas of impact are actually far more reaching, as Becky mentioned, and they have gathered critical support from the various groups with special interests across the whole campus. And that's what's really, really important and really wonderful about the projects that we're bringing forward today and where we have landed on this recommendation, that the scope as Becky mentioned, expands far beyond and really gets the support from groups who don't always see themselves in these particular parts of the building. So through our prioritization, we did test other scenarios, and we found that the proposals that we are about to walk you through in detail struck this comfortable balance of the needs of today with the needs of tomorrow. And that was where we were able to find that comfortable balance between the prioritized projects in this package and the support of the community, both within the school and hopefully out in the greater Mercer Island community. So jumping into a little bit more detail, Becky will walk you through a couple and I will hop back in.
Thanks. So starting with CREST, the highest priority to impact and improve this building really sits at that main entry. And it's because it is there that we can improve the safety and well-being of those who experience this building every day. So that is for adding or improving the safety and throw through a vestibule, as well as improving the facility to support physical and mental health through a reimagined nurses' room and support spaces at the front door. Next, we're looking at student and community support in renovating the stadium bathrooms. Repeatedly, we heard that those bathrooms are not serving not only your community, but also those who come to visit the campus and attend your events, outdoor events. And so therefore, improving these can have a far-reaching impact for your community and beyond. Student support spaces that sit right now in your locker rooms, and the proposal to upgrade those facilities so that they are welcoming and supportive of PE students, of athletes, and visiting teams when they come to the campus to use. So what that will look like is providing safe, inclusive, and accessible training room and changing spaces, and improving the coaching and team meeting spaces.
When we move further into the building and we look at the commons, this is where students, parents, visitors, and outside community groups really come to interact with the school. And the hope was to create a space that is more welcoming for eating, working, and gathering for all of these different stakeholders. We'll also, in doing that, in order to make this space more welcoming, we'd look at very targeted things like improving the acoustics, replacing the finishes, and enhancing some of those nooks that are already in the corridor to create this comfortable space for daily and special event use. This also serves as kind of the landing pad for the events that happen in the two spaces adjacent. We're looking to provide safe and inclusive restrooms for all students and visitors, and to update the student store and career counseling as this really new heart of the Mercer Island High School campus. The adjacent spaces right off of that renovated commons would be areas where we are able to showcase student work. And student work comes in a variety of ways. It can be through athletics, it can be through the arts, it can be through robotics, it can be through various different avenues, and these spaces are already supporting those programs in that way. We are looking to support them better and really targeting the size of the audience to affect the amount of materials and equipment that need to be updated to support the work that is already happening from these incredible students. So we'd look at revitalizing the materials here, really addressing and tuning the acoustics in both of these spaces, and making sure that the equipment and lighting is there to match the caliber and the performance of the programs that use these spaces already. From there, we go into the learning core. These are two wings that connect off of the main pathway through the main circulation path through the school, the 200 and 300 wings. And what we are looking to do here is really stimulate the connections across the campus and between the classrooms, leveraging the courtyard space that's currently just a visual through the windows to a space where students can actually go and connect with nature and actually take some shortcuts through the building, having landing pads on either side where they can connect with each other and with their teachers in these new shared spaces. We're looking to provide an accessible ramp that is connecting the 300 wing to the 400 wing and removing a set of stairs that is currently um, a bit of an obstacle for both your students and your teachers to navigate between the different levels in the school. Um, we're looking to relocate some of these programs that are really amplifying student voice, some of those personalized passion projects, to share the resources better and centrally locate them so they are easier to get to the other showcased spaces. Update the equipment that is aging in those areas to really facilitate hands-on learning and making, and replacing the worn and dated finishes along the corridors and in the classrooms to revitalize that space so it feels like a space you'd like to be, and bring them closer in alignment to the additions that were recently completed in the building.
And finally, our must-do safety and well-being projects. In this work, we are going to be addressing the aging systems to ensure continued building operations in the main campus and Crest buildings. And what that's going to look like are upgrades to the HVAC, your mechanical system, and your fire alarm system. Specific to the mechanical system, we're going to be replacing select central plant equipment. We're going to be rebuilding existing air handling equipment, and we're going to be replacing the building control system, which is how we, in the spaces, are able to tune and adjust the comfort of those spaces and have the system actually be responsive. That'll really have a big impact on how we are experiencing our time in the buildings. With the fire alarm upgrades, this is going to holistically bring both buildings up to meet current code by installing the system that aligns with the requirements of um, of our current codes.
And in addition to all of that, we are really excited about the sustainability opportunities that we see with these proposed projects. On the screen, you see four different aspects of sustainability that we consider when we look at the design and operations of a building. And I'll walk you through each one of those. So the first one here is the opportunity to acknowledge and address embodied carbon. For those that are not familiar with the idea or the concept, embodied carbon is the emissions that are generated to make, install, and dispose of the materials that go into making buildings. So if you look at the diagram at the very bottom of your screen here, you can see an example of a steep line in gray, and that is the amount of emissions or the amount of carbon required to make all of the things that go into making our buildings. And from the top of that line, it kind of picks up a less steep, which brings us into the operational carbon. And I'll walk you through that in a moment. So how this is relevant for us is that the existing building and the existing structure and layout are already there. We are taking advantage and leveraging that because it's actually working quite well for you. And by leveraging those existing systems, we are reducing the amount of embodied carbon. And we're also limiting the amount of things that we need to demo that go into a landfill. When we're talking about operational carbon, these are the emissions that are generated to fuel the building systems, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems to run a building. So where this is relevant for the projects that we are looking at is the mechanical systems upgrades that Becky just talked about and the repairs. And these are allowing us or setting us up for incremental steps towards transition or replacement as those systems age over time. But it's giving us a good way to make sure our operations are as efficient as they can be without full on replacements. When we talk about material health, this is when we, as the design team and professionals, are looking and selecting sustainable materials that are non toxic. We are assessing the chemicals and what goes into the materials that go into the buildings. And where this is relevant for us is we're actually doing a lot of material exploration in replacement as we think about updating these spaces. So we would look for materials that are non toxic, that are bio-based, and they have that low embodied carbon, which means it doesn't take a lot of energy for our planet to make them, nor does it take a lot of energy for those to come back into their raw materials at disposal at end of life. And these materials must be durable. They have to be safe and easy to install and maintain. And lastly is the human health component of it. Sustainability as a term has come to recognize it's not just about the planet, it is also the people that occupy the building. And these are the methods that we can use to support human health and well-being by improving the building conditions and design decisions. So this is relevant in a term that we use called indoor environmental quality. And this relates to air quality, so the air that we're breathing. It relates to acoustics and the way in which sound is moving in space to allow us to focus and concentrate and hear. Lighting, to address the quality of light in the space and address things like glare. Thermal comfort. What is the temperature within the room and the ability to feel comfortable within a reasonable range as we are inside spaces? And ergonomics. This is the way in which we can adjust the space around us to really fit and support different sized and shaped bodies. And all of these things come together to create a space that supports the health, the well being, the comfort, and the productivity of your students and your teachers. So with that, here's a summary of all of the proposed projects. So you'll have a list of what we had spoken through. And we're really excited about how we have come to this beautiful balance that strikes the health, the well-being, the sustainability, and the operations of this building. So with that, we did want to know, we wanted to preview what the community was feeling, their initial evaluations about this proposal. And what did they tell us? So remember, these are the groups that we spoke to. We spoke to the leadership team a handful of times. We spoke to our GET a couple of times, and we spoke to the school community. Now, remember that what we were asking them here was different than the initial gathering phase. We really wanted the leadership team to help us select and prioritize the projects from that lens of operations. We wanted our GET to help us interpret how their various representative groups would understand these projects and to prioritize them against the values, those guiding principles that we co-created. And we wanted to reach out to the broader school community to evaluate their general level of support. So we did come back to some of the groups that we met in the last spring. We spoke to our students, their parents, and the staff cabinet. In addition, the superintendent has been doing some additional outreach. So this time, our school community outreach journey was a little bit narrower. It was a little bit more focused because we were focusing in on that specific feedback of the projects, less gathering all of these big, broad needs. So what did we hear? We had three different categories of feedback. The first is the questions. What we really loved from the students was this notion of wanting to be included, and they wanted to know how they could continue to be included in the process so that their voice was heard. Not just in the initial needs and hopes and dreams, but hopefully, if this bond is approved and passed, how they continue to bring their voice into the conversation to shape their space and their environment. The parents really had some questions about timelines to understand how it would affect their students that are either going to come into the building or maybe coming out of that building. And our faculty really had some questions around what happens for the needs that aren't prioritized for this first bond. And that was great for us to remind ourselves and them that we have not lost that list of needs, but we had to prioritize the work that must be done first. The second category of questions are the concerns. The parents shared with us that they had the ability to talk with us in those rooms and ask their questions but wanted to be sure that we were able to clearly communicate to the broader community who may not have students currently in the school system or have students that have left the school system, so that we are clear in sharing the impact of the work for those who may not see it as a direct influence in their life today. The students really wanted to know what life could be like in their school during construction. And we had to remind them that we first need to get approval, but there are pathways to make sure that their life during construction would not be wholly different than it is today. They will still be in a space where they can learn and thrive. And the outcome of that is a space where they will really feel that they have the support and the resources they need more so than they have today. And for the faculty, it did come back to that idea, is there anything that can be done for those core classroom areas that are not selected in this scope of work? And this is where we got to remind them that some of this work can be addressed through other means, like Brandy had mentioned earlier in this meeting today, or we can explore in things like alternate funding, like CapTech funding for things like furnishings. And lastly, we got a lot of support. We heard from the parents that it was clear to them that this was a very thoughtful approach to how we went through the process and that we were very rigorous in trying to get feedback along the way. Um, that we heard from the leadership team that they were so excited that they were seeing overlap in groups who don't always see eye to eye. We heard from the faculty members that for the ones whose spaces had not been initially identified, that they really appreciate the clarity of us communicating where the work would start and stop, and that we have a pathway to track and record all of the conversations up until this point. And from the get, the reminder that they felt that the proposal is really grounded in that why, and they see the impact to the students and the teachers really reflected through that lens of the guiding principles that they helped us co-create. So lastly, we were really excited around the consensus that we heard from all of these different community groups. And this was one quote that we wanted to share that came from the GET when we had previewed these proposals with them, that the projects make sense. It's a sign of good compromise. After understanding all of the competing needs, of which there were many, it feels like everyone is getting something and giving something.
So, what we leave you with are some critical takeaways. And that is that these proposed bond projects are going to create meaningful impact through targeted student, educator, and community-focused improvements. That they are designed to enhance safety, access, and academic opportunities for the high schoolers on your campus. And that we are optimizing existing infrastructure through strategic renovations. And that will allow us to uphold the legacy of excellence because we're going to finally align learning spaces with the high academic standards of your community. And that this ultimately is about responsible investment to competitively equip the Mercer Island students with the facilities and resources they need for health and success. With that, thank you so much for taking the time to learn about the process and to better understand the recommended outcomes. And we look forward to seeing you at next week's school board meeting.